Sumona Banerji is a futurist, cyber-psychology researcher, and entrepreneur aimed at developing products that build emotional intelligence, cyber resilience, and cognitive security. Her goal is to mitigate risks to human cognition and connection in the face of exponential technology through innovation in education, mental health, and ethical technology. Now, here is Sumona.
Thank you so much. I do want to say I'm really grateful for all of you to be here. The topic that we are discussing is really important and really eminent to the welfare of humanity, especially given how fast things are moving. And thank you for giving me your time as we go through this today. So, I won't give an introduction about myself per se, but I would like to talk a little bit about my context and experience as to how I came to this point. I've always been really fascinated about learning about the impact of technology on human cognition and social behavior and psychological well being as a whole. My background is a mix of mental health, psychology, and neuroscience. So I've come from that space. And in my master's thesis was the first time I took all the research that I was doing that was very abstract and managed to put it out on paper and put it all out there to make sense and visualize it. And initially, when I started this research, I was studying the cyber psychological implications of a life led in virtual reality. I wanted to understand what VR addiction looked like. If there was a possibility, what is the future of VR, and how do people behave if they're living predominantly in an artificially created reality? So originally, when I did this study, I was targeting it towards mental health professionals. But when I presented this research a while ago, it was picked up by people within the cybersecurity field. And I honestly am very new to the cybersecurity industry. But when I did enter it and I started bringing my research there, I realized that there was a huge gap within the cybersecurity space where a lot of the solutions and the problems are focused on infrastructure and technology, whereas a lot of the problems and the solutions really lie on in the human side, the human element. So this now is my attempt to take a step back and adapt and explore cognitive security from the lens of cybersecurity, but also kind of take you with me on the journey of how I define cognitive security, because it is a concept that's still evolving every day. So I invite you to close your eyes for a moment, if that's okay, and imagine this. You're just done with a long day of work. You've been working all the way from morning to evening, and you're finally leaving the office. You step out of your office building and you look up at the sky. It's a serene evening. You're living in one of the world's most technologically advanced cities. You look to your right and you have all these autonomous cars flying around. You look to your left and you have a series of smart buildings with a hyper-connected infrastructure. Scale up the building through the windows and go to the top floor, a penthouse in the building. Zoom in through the window. A young girl walks into her bedroom and greets her AI-powered virtual assistant that looks like a teddy bear. She asks it for a bedtime story as usual, part of her routine. But instead of hearing a fairy tale, she hears a voice whispering insidiously, "If you love your dad, make sure he doesn't go to work tomorrow, or something bad may happen." Little did she know that a war was on its way to the city. And it wasn't just the city's advanced computing systems that the enemy targeted. It was the mind of the little daughter of the city's chief information security officer. Open your eyes. If you were the CISO here, what would you do? What would your response or our response be to a threat or an attempt to influence or recruit your child as a part of a cyber attack? I'm sorry, it's tough. But what I want to bring to attention is that this isn't just a potential future, but a very recent past. We're going to talk about a couple of cases where it may at the beginning seem disjointed, but it's not so. In 2023, just this year, Jax Teixeira, a 21-year-old employee of the Massachusetts Air National Guard, was arrested by the FBI for leaking highly sensitive Pentagon information and documents about US military operations online. But he leaked this online onto a gaming website in a Discord group filled with teenagers who were fascinated by war. Apparently, there was a lot of investigation done around his motive, and Teixeira didn't seem to have much of a motive except for the fact that he was in a little tiff with some of the members of that group, and he did it to justify something. He did it to show off the information he had, to impress his friends, to establish himself as an important person and member of the small community of digital gamers. In The Guardian, in 2021, among 17 children arrested in the UK on acts of terrorism, the youngest person sentenced was 13 when he was first radicalized through social media. And this child subsequently became the leader of a banned neo-Nazi terrorist group that glorified individuals responsible for racist mass murder. As lonely adolescents, the journey of these two boys and countless more are disquieting, not for their uniqueness, but for their part in a growing pattern. Both described as estranged from parents, socially isolated, and emotionally underdeveloped. The teenagers were left highly vulnerable to manipulative messaging that finally seemed to give their life some meaning. Data shows that social engineering is highly involved in above 80% of cybercrimes. Why? Because we all know that no matter how powerful our security systems are, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And that link is the human. And the human mind, it's fragile. It's very powerful, but it's also really fragile. So technical systems have their defenses, redundancies are built, firewalls are set, codes are encrypted. Well, what about the humans who are controlling, designing, overlooking, and using our systems? The brain doesn't come with a password, and there are hardly any security patches for human vulnerability. We have lived in the shadow of nuclear war for decades, yet modern warfare has taken a completely new form, which isn't necessarily a mushroom cloud at the horizon, but is more likely to be a silent invasion that's fought and is being fought currently, not just in cyberspace, but in the very synapses of our brains. Instead of traditional warfare, for example, a country could be a target of an attack during elections or during key legislations around national interests. Psychological operations, or psychops, are now faster, cheaper, and more scalable than any weapon out there. And critically, it's anonymous. So my definition of cognitive security is that while cybersecurity focuses on system servers, networks, and devices, cognitive security is about preserving the sanctity of the most powerful computer ever made, the human brain, defending it from manipulation, dark patterns, misinformation, addiction, and degenerating cognition that are just tools and channels that aid in psychological operations and social engineering. So this graph was one of many things that turned my passion for cognitive security into a mission. Over here, you can see technological debt, which is the gap between the rate at which technology is advancing and the human adaptability curve. This technological debt is growing exponentially. And as it grows, disruption grows. And the complexity and potential for vulnerabilities also grow exponentially. If you neglect the cognitive dimension, this debt will soon become unpayable. And it's a debt not just of technology or economy, but of trust, of security, of autonomy, perception, and perception of reality as a whole. So I spent the last few years trying to gain a better understanding of the fragility of the human mind and what makes it so. And one of the most glaring evidences of this fragility, of the increasing fragility, is the epidemic, not just of COVID, but of a severely declining state of psychological well-being across nations, mostly in North America. Now, we've always known that the human mind is fragile, but what is causing such an amplification of this fragility? Right? So, when trying to answer this question, what is causing such an amplification, I was immediately faced with a challenge. This fragility is directly related to a decline in psychological states that are scaled massively through technology today. But there is no way of actually visualizing or quantifying this decline, or what we call the downward spiral. Many of us probably use this term, oh, I'm on a downward spiral, pretty often in everyday life, but what does that really mean? What does that really look like? And what are the elements that really constitute that? Because if we don't figure that out, we cannot find interventions that are effective. So through our work, we have overcome this hurdle by developing a 6-parameter framework that identifies and visualizes exactly this, the downward spiral, which is what I call the cognitive risk spiral framework. A little context as to how this framework was developed. It is built on a very simple yet very powerful theory. I had reached a little brain block while I was doing my research, trying to figure this out. I was bashing my head through the wall. And I decided to just go on a random walk with my friend when the epiphany hit. So I was on a walk with my friend at a park. And my friend had been in a car accident that had shattered his left hip and leg. And he was walking with a crutch. So while talking, I asked him how he was doing with his recovery. And he said he was doing pretty okay, but he didn't really have a lot of hope of walking without a crutch anymore. So I asked him why. The thing is, his accident was 6 years ago. I knew he had been in therapy for a very long time, physiotherapy for a very long time. So why did he lose hope about walking without a crutch again? So he looked at me and he rolls his eyes and he says, well, it's a lot of daily exercise and I don't like exercise to begin with. I've been trying. My therapist says that I can walk on both legs, but every time I try and walk on my left leg, it really hurts. I haven't been using my left leg for the last 6 years, and so the muscles are weakened and it's just really painful. So for the time being, I'd rather just use this crutch. It's more convenient. It gets me by my day. It took me a while to process this information and this logic about where he was coming from. Sure, the crutch gave him some relief in the short term, but his right leg had started developing ailments. He was having knee problems, back problems, which further reduced his ability to walk, which further was deteriorating his health. He was trapping himself. And that's when it clicked. When someone is unequipped to deal with experiences of stress, failure, trauma, loneliness, and is unable to find a supportive environment to do so, psychological well-being, or the psyche, starts developing fractures. The mind is like water. It naturally takes the route of least resistance to get what it wants. So, in a desperate attempt to maintain some sense of well being, a person recruits what we call psychological compensation, just like many recruit physical compensation. Psychological compensation occurs when someone with a fractured psyche tries to find their crutches through drugs, alcohol, toxic relationships, it could be anything, but most rampantly through technology. Many of which, as we all know, are designed specifically to increase addiction. So, though in the short term it gives some sense of feeling good, some sense of belonging, filling up that void, if the crutch is used for too long, it only increases the fracture of their psyche. But again, I'm a very visual person, so I had to visualize this. We have some great people in the space of cognitive psychology, one of them being Carol Reef, who conceptualized what a healthy psyche and what the 6 dimensions of the psyche are. So you have autonomy, self-acceptance, positive relationships, environmental mastery, personal growth, and a sense of purpose. When all these dimensions are in the positive, a person is said to be or have a healthy psyche. So I use these as a starting point to build out the rest of the framework. And I put it as a circle, and you will realize why very soon. So based on this, what we started building out was what I'm calling the working theory of cyber psychological compensation. Cyber psychological compensation trap is what is increasing the fractures in cognitive security, risk of manipulation, and increasing vulnerability. How so? Let's take autonomy, for example. When the capacity for autonomy or trust in self-determinism, intuition, instinct is fractured, algorithmic determinism starts taking its place, which is okay to a degree. We all do it. But to what degree? When an individual starts relying heavily on technology and the feedback from technology as a source for truth, their ability to discern misinformation becomes impaired. Just imagine, in an attempt to escape feelings of loneliness or trauma, an individual might endlessly consume algorithmically driven data, easily getting trapped in information echo chambers, reinforcing certain beliefs, perceptions. Usually they're quite extreme because those are the things that the human mind gets attracted to, negativity. It reduces their capacity for decision making, for informed decision making, for critical thinking, which at its extreme can lead to potential radicalization, like the 13-year-old that we spoke of earlier. Self-acceptance, for example. When the most primal human need to be socially accepted is diminished and self-esteem is fractured, which is also on the rise, there's a lot of studies on that, it is compensated through the pursuit of validation. And this validation is now coming through virtual platforms, activities, and identities, virtual anonymous identities. So how easy could this be? A person experiencing consistent failures in personal or professional life can become problematically engrossed in online multiplayer games, where they can finally experience some sense of victory, of influence, of power, of success. The intense need for approval can make anyone a target to conformity pressures, groupthink, making them susceptible to emotional manipulation or dubious actions to gain social status, just like 21-year-old Takshira. Now, we all know what happens when someone has a fractured or non-existent healthy real-world relationships. It is compensated through virtual ones. The increase in virtual relationships, not just virtual human relationships, but virtual AI bot relationships, AI girlfriends, AI boyfriends, it's on the rise, and it can potentially lead to further weakened real-life human connection. You're locked up in your room for 13 hours a day. The erosion of face-to-face interactions increases isolation, increases loneliness, reduces empathy, and also increases dehumanization, especially of the other groups or the outgroups that media propagates a lot, creating fertile soil for germinating divisive and polarizing narratives or radicalization. So for time constraints, I'm only going into 3 out of 6 mechanisms, but now you can see how this goes. Environmental mastery being compensated by environmental control, especially as we go into VR spaces, augmented reality spaces where you can be wherever you want to be, whenever you want to be, whoever you want to be, and you can exit without consequences. Personal growth being compensated with reward addiction, the dopamine hit, and sense of purpose being compensated with digital escapism, which is a whole other topic to discuss. The biggest problem is that all these mechanisms are all reinforcing loops because they're compensation traps. And as we increasingly rely on the compensating layers, the core green dimensions decrease. And not just that, but every dimension of psychological well-being is interconnected to the other. So as one starts to collapse, they all start collapsing like dominoes if there is no intervention, leading to a state where someone is just living highly fractured, like a puppet, probably in acute levels of anxiety, depression, loneliness, suicidal environment, all of that. So when we talk about the downward spiral, this is the spiral we're talking about. At the bottom of the cognitive risk spiral, we're dealing with highly vulnerable individuals primed for manipulation and cyber attack, but meant much more than just that, right? And with MindShield has been my attempt to launch an initiative that brings experts together to build protocols to seed and reverse this cognitive risk spiral into the cognitive resilience spiral. So we can take individuals from high vulnerability to high resiliency. And this is possible. There's a lot of studies, solutions that we're working on. It's possible. But this gives us a way to measure and visualize this. Now, if the cognitive risk spiral continues to manifest and spread at the rate it is right now, the implications on national security are immense. We're talking widespread manipulation, civil unrest, erosion of social cohesion, trust in authority. I mean, there's already a lot of decline in that. Polarization between people, lack of social trust. A country can be brought to its knees and crumbled today without raising a single gun. Now, I'm sure the looming question is, how do we protect ourselves? It's a good question. What we should be asking first is, when do we protect ourselves? And the answer was 10 years ago. We're already late to the party and we're already playing catch up. But we can catch up. That's the good news. And it starts by building very small starting points of building engaging, effective, and scalable initiatives that educate, alert, train human mind and behavior to be cyber resilient. But that's vague. That's the tip of the iceberg. We need to incorporate cognitive security and integrate it within society at every level. We need to start by training our citizens to identify their fractures and recognize manipulation and misinformation at an individual, at an organizational, and ultimately at a national and international level. It starts from everyone, from children to parents to corporations to national government. So this is a bit of the solution space, but it's a long conversation, so I'm going to skip over this for now. Maybe we can discuss that later. But we're working on that right now, and it's not a one-man job. It's not a one-company job. So I ask you, and I'm presenting this to you because with all the brilliant minds present here, how can we work together to build this kind of a defense for our citizens? With all the resources we have out there, it is feasible to start building a world where everyone from tech giants to students in classrooms, are a fortified stronghold against cyber warfare. Together, we have to make cognitive security a global standard, not just a term, because our minds are worth defending just as much as our systems are. What I've just presented to you is a conceptual framework to visualize the two cognitive spirals, so we can build more robust assessments and interventions based on it as a starting point, at least. So it can be something that acts as a guiding North Star as we're designing technology, as we're designing solutions, to determine whether our solutions are going in the right direction. Are they increasing the psyche, healing the fractures, increasing empowerment, or taking away from it and compensating? The market need is increasing exponentially, and there are very few movers right now. So I'm looking to collaborate, and not just with the tech field, of course, the tech field, but also with the human fields as well. That's why there's design, there's psychology, behavior, neuroscience, there's art, there's movement, education, technology. These siloed industries and conversations need to come together to figure out how we are reverse engineering the spiral. The clock is ticking, the stakes are high, and every moment we spend unguarded is a moment our adversaries can exploit and are exploiting. And so we need to act now. And it's not just for our safety, it's for our children who are growing up in this generation. And for that young girl who simply wanted a bedtime story. That's all I have for you. Thank you.